This was never gossip. This was never rumor. This was never speculation whispered in dark corners. January 2026 detonated something far more dangerous. Receipts. Clear, undeniable yacht photos. Private decks. Elite interiors. Sun-drenched Mediterranean waters where access is bought, controlled, and never accidental. And right there, standing comfortably in spaces most people will never even glimpse, was Meghan Markle. Years before royalty, years before titles, years before the carefully polished survival narrative she sold the world, let's kill the fairy tale immediately. These weren't charity brunches. These weren't casual celebrity mixers. These were closed circle yachts, invitation-only environments where billionaires, Gulf power brokers, and Saudi-connected elites don't socialize for fun. They socialize for leverage. You don't wander onto these boats. You are placed there. And here's the detail that makes this explode. The timeline. These photos trace back to 2008 through 2012, the exact period Meghan publicly described as her struggling actress years. Rent stress, career uncertainty, hustling auditions. That story collapses the moment you realize these yachts cost more per night than most people earn in a year. Monaco summers, Mediterranean circuits, staffed crews, discreet facilitators. None of it lines up with cable TV paychecks and brief TV appearances. So the real question isn't, was she there? The photos answer that. The real question is, who put her there and why? Because money doesn't move silently in elite spaces. Someone paid for flights. Someone arranged access. Someone vouched. Someone decided she belonged. And in circles like these, nothing, absolutely nothing, is free. People rush to soften this by calling it networking. But let's be brutally honest. This wasn't casual networking. This was strategic social placement, a well-known unspoken system inside elite power circles where individuals are introduced because they serve a purpose. Socially, reputationally, relationally, strategically. And here's the part mainstream media refuses to touch. Meghan didn't look like a tourist. She didn't look overwhelmed. She didn't look dazzled or out of place. According to multiple sources familiar with these environments, she moved like someone who understood hierarchy, who knew when to speak, when to listen, and who mattered. She wasn't tolerated. She was kept. And people are only kept in these circles when they're useful. That's what turns this from uncomfortable to explosive. Because these photos don't span one summer. They stretch across years. Years of access. Years of presence. Years of protection. That doesn't happen unless investment is involved. And when investment exists, power expects a return. Now let's talk about the guests. Because this is where the story crosses a line most outlets are terrified to step over. These weren't Hollywood producers and harmless socialites. These gatherings allegedly included Saudi-connected figures and Gulf elites operating far outside celebrity culture. This isn't fame culture. This is international power culture. An entry into that world requires vetting, discretion, and silence. Which brings us to the most chilling detail of all. These photos were protected. For years, scandals inside these circles don't leak by accident. They're buried so deep they vanish forever. So when something surfaces a decade later, it's not curiosity, it's a message. Someone decided protection had expired, and when protection disappears, everything changes. Because now we have to ask the question no one wants to answer out loud: what rule was broken? In these environments, silence isn't optional, it's currency. And when silence ends, it usually means someone violated an unspoken agreement. Watch the pattern carefully. After years of elite exposure, Meghan's life suddenly accelerates. In 2011, she lands a career-defining role, not after a decade of industry grind, but after sustained access to high-level international circles. Then, years later, she's introduced to Prince Harry, not through Hollywood randomness, not through royal tradition, but through Soho House, a private members-only network designed to fuse wealth, influence, media, and politics behind closed doors. And by that point, Meghan wasn't naive. She wasn't new. She wasn't wide-eyed. She had nearly a decade of experience navigating power rooms where one wrong move ends careers quietly. That's why the narrative that she didn't understand hierarchy doesn't hold. Women who survive yacht circuits with Gulf elites don't stumble into palaces unprepared. They move strategically. Now pause here, because timing kills coincidence. These photos didn't surface during her wedding. They didn't surface during the Oprah interview. They didn't surface when public sympathy was at its peak. They surfaced January 2026, precisely when Meghan began pushing a reinvention, lifestyle branding, Netflix resets, a carefully curated comeback image. That timing isn't random, it's surgical. According to sources familiar with elite international networks, these images were held for years. Not lost, not forgotten, held. Released slowly, selectively, just enough to raise questions without burning the archive. That tells us everything. This isn't exposure for outrage, this is leverage. A reminder that silence was conditional, and those conditions may no longer be honored. And then there's the silence. No denial, no explanation, no contextual spin, no here's what really happened, nothing. And silence at this level isn't confusion, it's calculation. Because if these photos were innocent, the rebuttal would already exist. If there were harmless explanations, they'd be everywhere. But instead, there's nothing while analysts dissect every frame, recognizing exactly what these environments mean. Silence only works when you think a story will die. This one won't, because it's built on pattern, access, and unanswered money trails. And here's the part that should truly unsettle anyone watching closely. These photos are not the full archive. They are fragments, proof of life drops, signals. According to insiders, additional material may exist: travel records, invitations, correspondence, guest lists, and testimony from people who witnessed how these relationships were built and maintained. The people holding that information don't need validation. They don't need headlines. They just need one thing: for her to know they still have it. Because when discretion ends in elite circles, it doesn't end loudly. It ends slowly, one release at a time. This isn't a scandal peaking. This is a warning phase. This is the moment where people misunderstand what they're watching, because this was never about yachts, bikinis, or gossip page shock value. This is about power withdrawing protection. And when power steps back, it doesn't shout. It whispers just loud enough for the right people to hear. Because look at what didn't happen after these images surfaced. No emergency PR tour. No friendly journalist context pieces. No emotional counter-narrative. No planted defenses. Just silence. And silence at this level is never fear, it's assessment. It's weighing risk. It's deciding which version of the truth hurts less. Here's the reality most audiences don't understand. When elite circles leak, they never leak everything. They leak proof. Enough to establish credibility. Enough to say, we're not bluffing. The rest stays locked away unless needed. That's how leverage works. And according to individuals familiar with these networks, what surfaced in January 2026 wasn't even the sharpest material. It was the cleanest. The kind of release that can't be dismissed as Photoshop or rumor. Clear faces, clear settings, clear access, no ambiguity, just context screaming silently in the background. Now let's talk about why Prince Harry matters here, because his silence is just as loud. Harry has spent years positioning himself as the man who rescued Meghan from a cruel system, the knight narrative, the savior arc, the escape story. But these photos punch a hole straight through that mythology, because they don't depict a powerless woman discovering privilege for the first time. They show someone who already understood elite access, someone who had navigated international power long before palaces entered the picture. Which means Harry didn't marry someone unfamiliar with power. He married someone fluent in it. And that realization doesn't just bruise egos, it destabilizes the entire public narrative of their relationship. Because if Meghan understood power long before royalty, then the victim storyline becomes complicated. And when storylines fracture, alliances shift. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. Why now? Why surface this when Meghan is attempting another reinvention, lifestyle branding, curated femininity, controlled vulnerability, the soft reset? Because power doesn't intervene randomly. It intervenes when someone starts forgetting who opened the doors. Sources describe this phase as reminder season, not destruction, not revenge, correction. And correction works best when it's subtle. The message embedded in this leak is simple. Your past is still ours. And once that message is delivered, the next move depends entirely on response. That's why the absence of denial matters more than outrage ever could. In elite warfare, denial escalates. Silence buys time. But time only helps if the archive stays closed. Here's where the fear shifts, because insiders claim these yacht images are only one category. There are allegedly records that don't photograph well but explain far more. Guest introductions, travel overlaps, facilitated invitations, repeated access patterns that show consistency rather than coincidence. Patterns that answer the question everyone keeps circling but refuses to say plainly. Who invested and what was expected in return? This is why this story refuses to die. It's not salacious, it's structural. It exposes how power moves people like chess pieces, quietly, strategically, patiently. And here's the part that terrifies PR teams. This story doesn't require accusations. It doesn't need explicit claims. It only needs timing, access, and unanswered money. Because once you show someone in rooms they couldn't afford, during years they claimed survival struggles cycle, the math speaks louder than commentary. That's also why mainstream outlets hesitate, not because it's false, but because it's radioactive. You don't challenge Gulf-linked elite ecosystems casually. You don't interrogate those pipelines unless you're prepared for consequences. But consequences don't scare people who've already decided they're finished protecting you. This isn't about shaming, it's about repositioning. Stripping away the carefully constructed image of accidental ascent and replacing it with something far more dangerous, intentional navigation. And once that door opens, everything gets reevaluated. Career breaks, introductions, strategic friendships, media support, institutional backing. Suddenly the fairy tale looks less like fate and more like orchestration. Which brings us to the quiet question hanging over all of this: what happens next? Because in elite exposure cycles, phase 1 is proof, phase 2 is reaction, phase 3 depends entirely on cooperation. If silence holds and reinvention continues, pressure increases. Slowly, more fragments, more context, more accidental resurfacing. If resistance appears, escalation follows. Not loudly, not emotionally, administratively, legally, socially. And here's the brutal truth: once protection ends, there's no going back. Power never re-extends silence once it's withdrawn. It only manages damage. That's why this moment feels different, heavier, colder. There's no frenzy, just inevitability. This story didn't emerge because people were bored. It emerged because silence expired. And when silence expires, history becomes fair game. This isn't the climax. It's the opening chapter of something far larger. Because if these were the images they were willing to release, imagine what they're still holding. Imagine what they're still holding. Imagine what they're still holding. Imagine...